give a few years back now after an insanely excellent mushroom trip. And it was, I don't know, it was like the thing was that I became very aware of something that I've kind of instinctually, and many of us instinctually believe, that the earth is a living thing. And this was the concept shown in this painting, that you had all the dynamic forces of the cosmos and the planet, and the earth's flesh and blood as a skin. And it made me think about things like abiotic oil and things like that, and if the planet, if that was the planet's blood and things like that. Now this brings us to something I want to talk about environmentalism. Now, one of the things I have noticed, like a school teacher here pointing a piece of wicker, one of the things I have noticed in recent years is that they don't play up the atheist thing as much as they used to. You don't see Richard Dawkins and the rest of them on the radio and on the TV as much as you used to. And you don't have hardcore scientism, atheism pushed into your face to the level that they once did push it into our faces. And that's interesting because I think that was a direct result of even Brian Cox. You don't see much of Brian Cox these days compared to, say, 2 years ago. What does this tell us? It tells us that they have a schism regarding their climate change agenda. Now, I don't buy this whole climate change agenda thing. I know it's a big political thing for social control and taxation and everything. But I do believe there's a genuine ecological crisis regarding the oceans. I was in the Indian Ocean back in January and it was full of shit, full of plastic, and this is the real problem. The transestions are getting into the ecosystem in the water, both the fresh water and the seawater, causing real pollution. But when do you ever hear about that? In fact, the only people that bring it up are people in the alternative media, and they get laughed off as conspiracy theorists, even though this is the real pollution. But I think one of the reasons we don't hear, they don't push those hardcore atheists as much as they used to, is because it went in direct contradiction and created a schism between the idea that the earth is a living thing, a woman, Gaia, you'd have like promoted by the likes of James Lovelock, and it's something I absolutely believe. But I also believe that humans are part of nature. Unlike him, I don't think we're a parasite on the planet. But I do believe that the earth is a living thing, that there really is a Gaia, that this planet is alive and it has a consciousness and everything. And this is probably what resets humanity or civilization every 2,000 years or so. It probably just says it probably just yawns in its own, whatever a yawn is. It's the planet rotating on its axis or whatever. And I really do believe this. Now, this was a problem if they were saying there was no spirituality, there was no life, consciousness was just a neurochemical, neuroelectrical process in the brain, then they couldn't really sell the idea of the planet being a goddess to be protected. So they've sort of moved away from that. But now we have something very different with this Extinction Rebellion. It's almost like Orthodox Catholicism applied to environmentalism and to the global warming agenda. You have this kid, this little German kid, wherever she is being sent out there. She's being exploited totally, and she's almost put out there like a Virgin Mary, or very much the same way the Theosophists use Caspar Hauser, the child of Europe, the same kind of idea. I do worry about this kid. I wouldn't be surprised if they killed her off. I hope it doesn't happen, but this is what we're dealing now with a religious fanatic death cult. And they will want the blood of the lamb to sanctify the global warming religion, which is now turned into a kind of a flagellant thing. If you see, I saw this thing this morning in Brighton in England of an Extinction Rebellion thing where all these women were all dressed in red, like they're bleeding, and then you had them pouring blood down the steps in places like Paris, and you also have them putting their kids on the ground and drawing outlines around them like they're dead bodies. So it's become like a flagellant movement. They're now destroying themselves for Extinction Rebellion, but it speaks of a much deeper thing than just caring about the planet or anything like that. I think we're heading for a mass of suicides in the next few years. I think a lot of these things that are being foisted upon by the mainstream, what they call progressive agendas, will have an enormous spiritual price in society. and it will lead people into a spiritual crisis. And what we're seeing is it's like this kind of thing. You know those type of guys that are always saying they're suicidal, but they never commit suicide. It's an attention-seeking thing. It's a sympathy-mongering thing. Well, that's what the environmental issue is until Extinction Rebellion came along. Now they've actually got they bought the tablets, the sleeping pills, and the whiskey, and they're on the cusp of putting the plastic bag over their head or putting the rope around the door handle and hanging themselves. The ones that are really this is a frightening death cult. Now you're going to have horrors in the next few years unfolding. You're going to have parents like any other cult, like you had in the Solar Temple in Switzerland or in Jonestown, are going to start doing things like poisoning their children and saying, my child can't live in this planet anymore because my child will live on a planet that's dead. And I even saw something, yes, some professor said it's only human beings will only be around for another 6 years. I couldn't believe I was reading this. Now they're actively encouraging, this is madness, this is real mental illness, coupled with the fact that they're not getting their kind of globalist utopia they wanted. Now I don't like to get too much into politics on this channel, but because it's a dirty business I want to go near. But there is, aspects of consciousness and magic and sorcery to all that stuff as well. We saw it in Germany before the rise of the National Socialists, and here we are again. We're seeing something very similar to the early Middle Ages. We're seeing something very similar to the Crusades. And that's the only thing missing at this point is a crusade. And I predict that will come as well. At some point there will be crusades to that, to give salutation to the ice sheets, this kind of thing. Human beings are spiritual creatures, even if they think they're not. And I think this is why the environmental movement. You see, Al Gore and the rest of them, they told us that we were all supposed to be drowned by now by the melted ice caps, and the world would be so hot we couldn't exist. Here we are in Ireland. It's almost July, and I'm wearing a jacket, and it's actually not. There's no summer at all. It's still. It might as well still be March or April, and this is what's been going on. They were caught out on that one, and they are doing it again. But it's very frightening how they're saying it's only less than a decade human beings will be extinct. They're putting the idea into people's heads, and this is how a cult works. Cults work like this. This is how they operate. This is how they function. They have a doomsday scenario. They don't have there's a fatalistic aspect. They don't have this idea that life is great and we hang out, we're going to have a great time and have children and have families and friends. No, there's a doomsday thing to it. And you see, when I saw that thing in Brighton this morning, that was a culmination of other things I've seen to this point. They are the flagellants. They're the flagellants of the Catholic Church walking through Italian villages back in the 1100s, whipping themselves. They are the iconoclasts coming out of the desert of Syria, destroying pagan statues, smashing the noses off and carving crosses in their heads. There was only a matter of time now before they will start taking stuff out of museums. I think, especially, like I was looking at some images this morning of some Roman pottery that was sexual images between men and women, where the man was, on the woman, or they were doing a doggy style. They will all be taken out of museums next as offensive, because they'll be seen as being toxic masculinity. It's really going down, but take heart. This is a temporary thing. This is a kind of a reset. What happens is you always get a situation where it goes completely insane, and there's a reset. Now, unfortunately, that goes back too much the other way. The pendulum goes back too much the other way, and let's hope we don't go back to conservatism, which seems to be kind of happening. It's a bit of a worrying thing, like Christian conservatism, that kind of thing, or extreme atheism. Human beings are funny creatures that way. They seem to be the pendulum swinging. Love and hate, war and peace, freedom and slavery. This is how in general, they are as a species. But that's why we're not seeing as many atheists on the TV like we used to, or so many the hardcore atheist agenda. What's really going down now is we are trapped. The globalist system. Now, I'm not talking about a political thing here. I'm talking about from a psychic. I observe the psychic weather as well as the regular weather. There's aeromancy and psychomancy, culturomancy, whatever you want to call it, and. This Extinction Rebellion are the flashpoints of the Middle Ages. It's an extreme form of Catholic orthodoxy being brought into the environment. environmental movement, people need to watch this. They need to be very careful now. And I'm really frightened. We're going to hear lots and lots of stories of some father who's like he's killing his whole family because he thinks they have no future, and we have to be very careful that we don't fall into these things. But it probably will happen. It's just the nature of the beast. Human beings are just like that. This is why I never get involved in activism, because you cannot change human nature. You cannot, you cannot, you cannot you cannot be an activist for the soul or the spirit. You can only do that on an individual and personal level. You can't do it in a collective or a group. And I also believe now, I take a kind of a Chinese Taoist approach, that these are fatalistic ideas, that maybe these people are doomed to it. I think we have to accept that the the zeitgeist will unfold the way the zeitgeist wants to unfold, and to struggle against it will lead to madness or depression. The best thing to do is to be an impartial observer and watch it, and try not to get caught up in it or get brought into that way of thinking. The earth is not dying, but the oceans and the rivers need serious work. I was talking to a biologist recently that said it's probably beyond help, but I don't believe that at this point. I believe that it could be fixed. But no, they want to punish us with taxes, carbon taxes. What are carbon taxes? Penance. And you have these things where you don't use petrol for a week, you don't eat meat for a week, or you don't do lots of things. And this is Lent. You see, it's all roads come back to Rome. And people say that all roads lead to Rome, but really all roads